I'm not going to bother going through all of the WP Omaha, like, hey, this is who we are and what we do, and go to this part on our website to join the Slack channel. We're not going to do all that. If you have any questions about our meetup, because all these other people have heard that spiel,
you bet.
Hit me up. I'll tell you everything you want to know after this, okay? Also, I'll probably be going to Old Chicago after this because I'm usually hungry and mostly thirsty after this. And so some of us, well, I've got a hardcore after meetup beer following now, so we can count on that being a thing every time. Yeah. So for all of you on YouTube watching this, you need to show up to a meetup to come hang out with the cool people at Old Chicago. Or I guess you could just skip the meetup and wait for us at Old Chicago until we get there. That wouldn't be weird at all. Yeah. All right, cool. So today we are talking about this. Basically, the first steps I took to create this Meetup plugin. Now you're probably thinking, oh, he called it the Meetup plugin dev part 1 because this is on Meetup and we're going to talk about plugin dev. If you didn't read the details, that might be what you think. But that is not correct at all. I actually created a Meetup plugin for WordPress, and so that's what we're going to be looking at. Andres, would you mind hitting the lights? Just knock it down to either 25% or 0. I don't ever remember which one's best.
That's 25. That's decent.
Yeah, it's probably good enough. Cool, yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you guys a quick little rundown of what the plugin does. We're going to do a live demonstration of sorts, and you guys are all going to participate, and we're going to be off to the races. Sorry?
Let me see if we can break it.
You might be able to break it. However, I have worked out a lot of the kinks in it over the past week or two. So, and I know I said that last time.
And the time before.
But it should be encouraging to know that I continue to work on it. Because it's still true. I've worked on it between now and even last week. So I will keep working on it until it works 100%. Okay, so this is our website, wpomaha.org, where you can find all things WP Omaha. You can, whatever, go to content. Our YouTube videos are all on here if you don't remember our YouTube channel. And then a little bit about us, and there's some contact forms on here. If you are interested in speaking, you can go in here, request to speak about whatever topic. If you want a topic, you don't want to speak, you can go in there to suggest a topic. But the most important part that we're interested in today is this part where you go to free meetups and then you go to check in. And when we check in, we see, sorry, there are no meetups to check in for today. Please check our schedule. The only reason I see that right now is because I'm currently logged in. As you can see by the toolbar across the top, I'm logged in as an admin. But if we go to this page in the old incognito window, which is never used for evil and always used for good, we'll see that when I go to this page, it basically says you're not logged in. In order to check in, you must first be logged in. Okay, cool. So most people probably don't have an account on this site yet. So you're probably going to click this guy. For now, until I get this page revamped a little bit, where I'm going to add a login with Meetup button on here eventually. But if you use the login to authenticate into the website, you'll want to just click register here anyway, even though you're just going to log in. Because what will happen here is that this button, if you have not registered on this site yet, it will register you. If you have already, it will just log you in. It's that simple. So we're going to put this to the test here. This is the part that's been failing for many weeks now. I'm happy to say that I'm mostly certain that it will not fail this time. So I'm just going to put in my usual creds here. It's going to log in. It's going to redirect. And we're going to end up on the page that we started on, but you can tell we're logged in because it says log out up here. Okay? So we're now logged in, but there's still no meetups to check in for today because I haven't gone through a very important part of the process as an admin of the site, which I'll show off to you right now. But at least I'm logged in, right? So that part works finally. I don't want to hear any more trash talking about how it's probably going to be broken again. Not anymore, because I figured it out. It was Flywheel and the weird caching stuff that I turned off. All right, so I'm, as admin, now going to go in here and I'm going to fiddle with the plugin that I created. Don't worry, I'll show you the code and, whatever. We'll definitely get into that. But I just want to show you some of the features first so that then when you look at the code, you know what the code is doing. So, first of all, what we want to do is we want to go to this little guy here to create today's meetup so that you guys can all get checked in if you're interested. The point behind checking in is that we're creating like a rewards system. So people who are more involved with the meetup group will acquire more points. So like if you talk, as a speaker, if you speak, you'll be rewarded points. If you attend and check in, you'll be rewarded points. If you go to WordCamp, you'll be rewarded points for WordCamp Omaha. There's just like all these I don't know, and we'll make more as time goes on or whatever. But the idea is your profile will build up points over time, and then whenever we end up getting sponsorship and stuff to give away, we'll give away stuff to people that have the most points, and we'll have ways of I'm going to build a little giveaway system into it, so it'll query all of the people that are part of the group that are RSVP'd for a meetup or whatever it be. Sometimes we'll give away things at specific meetups. Otherwise, we'll just do giveaways like at Christmas or something. It won't have anything to do with any meetup. And then it'll have a way to go through all the people with the highest points and then randomly select, and it'll be weighted and stuff. I haven't got to that part yet. One thing at a time. Okay, so that's all the ones. That's all the previous ones. We've got to click Add New. So I click Add New, and this looks a lot different than when you normally click Add New on a custom post type, which is what our meetup meetings are, is a custom post type. Normally, when you click Add New on a custom post type, it sends you to a blank post page where you get to put the title in and the description and all that stuff, right? I have overridden that with this plugin with my own custom page that I have designed to integrate directly with the Meetup API. So it only lets us choose from existing meetups and shows us what meetups there are to choose from. So as you can see, our Meetup plugin dev one is the only one that's an upcoming meetup, although technically it's not upcoming anymore because it is currently here. But yeah, anyway. And now we get to put in a meeting code. So basically this is the passphrase that I tell you all when you show up so that we can prove that you were here. If you're savvy and you know somebody else that's part of the meetup group that also RSVP'd and they didn't show up and you want to quick text them so that they can get online elsewhere and then check in, good for you. You've beaten the system, but I highly doubt anybody's going to do that. We'll get more into that later. We decided the passphrase today was going to be wood bottle. All one word, wood bottle. Okay, so then I just click publish. And it goes and it creates the post for me, and it sends us into the post. Don't mind all that business. All right, so there we are. Although I expected it to take me into the editing window of the post, not the actual post page. I guess I'll have to fix that. I don't know why it sent me to the actual... What? What's happening here? Edit meetup meeting. Am I going about things incorrectly? Meetup meetings. Stuff is not broken, okay? Calm down, people.
Hey, it even worked.
Of course. I'm telling you, I know what I'm doing. Oh, God. What's happening? Come again? This is interesting. Action edit. What? So the link is correct. Am I getting a 302? What's happening here? I click on this guy and it 302s me.
It's 302.
Redirect, I believe? Am I making that up? 302 is a redirect, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. let's just watch our network tab and see what's going on here real quick. I knew we were going to have to do some troubleshooting, so I have time allocated for this type of stuff. Network. Okay. We're going to turn on the old preserve log since we're going to be going from one page to another. And yes, we're being redirected for some reason. I'll have to change that soon and figure out why that is. That's unfortunate because I wanted to show you what the edit screen looked like for these. I don't know why that's being redirected. That's curious. We'll worry about that later. Anyway, not really a whole lot going on in the edit screen, like as far as like what's going on right now. There is some cool stuff in there that I want to show off, but it doesn't have a whole lot to do with what we're going to be talking about during the talk, so not a huge deal. It's an edit screen like any other post, but it does allow you to like manually go in and like manually check people in, and also see all of the people RSVP'd. But that's the part that we're not going to. So remember when I said we were going to throw shame at the people that didn't actually show up? It's going to be hard to do that because this is busted. So, it's too bad. Anyway, yeah, it shows all the people that RSVP'd and all their pictures, and then it like highlights the people that have RSVP'd. It's pretty cool. And then there's also some other fields. Oh, you got to like enter in the name of the person who's speaking. So there's like a speaker field. You can whatever. Anyway. So we'll just pretend like that wasn't broken and just keep it moving. So we have that there. So now you guys should all be able to check in. You said it worked, right?
Yes, it did.
You're good to go. You're good to go. You're good to go. Who else checked in? Raise your hand if you checked in. Awesome. Cool. You guys don't have to check in. It's all good. I understand if you guys think I'm going to try and steal all your information and like, you know, pose as you or something. I get it. It's cool. There's a lot of paranoid people out there, especially in meetup groups. Huh?
We're boring.
I appreciate you guys checking in though. So it proves that it works. Also, I have, remember the last week, was it last week? It was last week. Holy cow. Last week was the Google Analytics talk, and I have an event set up on that. I just want to show that off real quick. So for the people that went to last week's talk and are now watching this, which is probably a few people because it was an admin talk, I'll show you the event tracking. So this is kind of like a quick little part 2 of what I was talking about last week. And we go in here, and I don't know which one. Yep, we're in WP Omaha right out the gate. That's good because I have a bunch on here. And then we can go to events and overview. We'll probably have to change the time range because for whatever reason when you log into Google Analytics, it doesn't include the current day for whatever reason. But anyway, as you can see, we've got a lot more events here, and if we go to label, we'll see successful check-in 3, only 3. So I don't know what's up with that because like 5 of you raised your hands. So either there's people lying or something weird is going on with my code.
You are checked in, so.
Oh, no, I'm sure you are. You're good. No, I'm totally joking. I don't think anybody here is lying. It's probably just Google Analytics not being very efficient. Maybe if I refresh the page, it'll go up. Who knows?
Oh, I was on there and then I got off of there.
Oh, that you're the problem. I'm just kidding. It should still count. It should still track the event. Whatever.
If you try to check in a second time.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. That's not part of this talk anyway. All right, cool. So you guys are good. You're checked in. And, well, I don't have the page where you can actually see the details about previous meetups is not done yet. So that's a work in progress as well. That's what this should be. And it'll show all the people that actually showed up and checked in. And then eventually on your profile page, it will also show like how many meetups you've checked into and like how many points you've acquired from all those meetups and so on and so forth. It'll go do a query real quick through the database and build all this stuff up. Anyway.
What was
All right.
the passphrase again?
I'm sorry?
What was the passphrase?
Wood bottle, all one word. Yeah. Cool. So that's kind of what we're looking at. That's kind of the deal. There's a custom post type. Oh, nope, sorry. I almost forgot one very important thing. Got to go back into the admin. There's a settings area, right? Because we have to configure this plugin to work with our meetup. And the idea of all of this is that we're creating a plugin that can be distributed to the masses, that any meetup that has a WordPress site should be able to use this plugin and kind of do the same thing that we're doing eventually when it's done. Okay, so I'll show you where the settings are. Go down to where settings, there's right there. And then I'm gonna call it BuddyPress, I think, because I feel like that's hilarious, because when you say BuddyPress, it sounds like you're talking about
Making burgers.
meat that you consume. But for whatever reason, I couldn't think of a better, like that. I didn't think of that name when I first started building this thing, so I just called it Meetup for WP groups, even though it occurred to me later that they didn't have to be WordPress meetup groups in order to use the plugin. They could be any meetup group, but just ignore the title for now. Okay, people, I'm working on this plugin still. Okay, so anyway, so here we have a fancy settings page where we can put in a bunch of information that the API needs to know in order for us to make successful API calls to the Meetup API. So it needs to know our group URL. That's an easy one. And then we have our Meetup API key, which we don't want everybody in the world to see. And then we have a consumer key, which I don't care if everybody does. Good luck trying to figure out the rest of it. And then we have an OAuth consumer secret, which it's a secret, so that's why it's a bunch of dots. And then I created the ability to include like a cache time, so you can control how frequently your plugin reaches out to Meetup for fresh data that it hasn't already gotten. So right now it's just set to 1 minute. And so we can make it 5 minutes or 10 minutes. The idea here being, if you have an extremely active site, you don't want to hit the threshold of the limit of Meetup API calls. And so if the more active your site is, the higher you're probably going to want to bump that number up, essentially. But since ours isn't super active, I just left it at 1 and called it good. So it's pretty fresh data all the time. And I'll show you how I'm caching the responses from the call and how it figures out whether or not we have fresh cache data too. It's not super complicated. I'm just using transients. If you don't know what transients are, you're going to learn about it today. So anyway, so this is probably the most important part, because this is the part we're going to start off talking about today. Is if we're creating a plugin from scratch and that plugin requires settings by the admin to like set up and get going, how do we easily add a bunch of settings to our plugin, right? I'm going to show you 3 different frameworks to do that. We could probably look into how you do it without frameworks, but trust me when I tell you, it's just not worth it. There's a lot of code involved. So, I mean, you could Google away if you want. We could just go to like WordPress custom settings page, and I'm sure that the codex is probably going to come up. Here we go, creating options pages. And so the codex will show us like their way of doing it, right? And so there is an API built into WordPress specifically for this. However, you're going to have to write a bunch of code just to get the page. And then you got to go in and register each setting. And then you got to go like create the fields for each setting. And depending on what kind of fields you want, things can get real crazy real quick. If you want a color picker or a date picker, if it's anything that's kind of fancy as far as like, if it's beyond the basic input text field or something, then you got to like start adding JavaScript and jQuery to make those certain fields work. And you could spend a lot of time like just building a settings page. The whole idea behind settings frameworks is that let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's make it way easier for us to add not just the page for the settings, but also all of the settings in that page. So we'll talk about 3 of them. The first one that I'll show off is the one that I used for this one, and then we'll show off 2 other ones. Okay, so 2 of the 3, interestingly enough, were worked on by the guy who is credited with initially getting this our meetup going. WP Omaha specifically. So he just happens to be a native Nebraskan. He lives in La Vista. He's not the guy that originally started the group, like originally, but the guy who originally started the group only did it for a little while, and then it was mostly this other guy named Dan Griffiths who took it over for a while, and Dan Griffiths is also the reason why we have WordCamp Omaha and a bunch of other stuff. Very bright developer. I got to meet him once, but that's because I went and hunted him down. Anyway, so he has a company called Section 214. I don't know how active he is as far as like doing work for people or whatever, but I do know for a fact that when I talked to him that one time, he told me about this cool framework that he made. And we'll get into why we talked about that in a second. But basically, if you look up Section 214, and maybe like GitHub. No? Let's do S214 settings framework. GitHub. Hopefully he didn't take his GitHub down, because that would be traumatic. I know it's S214. Where are you? It's not this, is it? Unless somebody else took it over? Definitely not this. Come on. Where are you? Okay, let's just try this. There he is. I don't know which one is his. Come on, man. This should be easy to find. What if I just look up his company name? Section 214. And we'll take the GitHub off. How about WordPress? Holy cow, this guy is really good at disappearing. Especially when I need him most. Am I like... Do I have the number wrong? What is this? This is going to make me dive into the code now. It is S214. That's... What we got here? Well, I'm sorry, Dan. I'm not trying to rip you off, but I might have to take your framework and put it up on my GitHub because I can't find yours. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can usually just Google it and find it. I don't know why all of a sudden I'm not. Maybe it's all one word? Section 214 GitHub? Ha! Ha! Yes. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. I was about to get real let down there for a second. Okay, cool. I will not rip you off now. Okay, cool. All right. So this is a very light, very basic settings framework. How do you use it? You simply go here, you download it, okay, and well, I'll get into how I set it up here in a second. But this is a very, very light version of another thing that he created that how many people here have used like premium WordPress themes? Cool. So you may or may not have heard of or seen and just don't know what it was called. This is a more robust one that is very prevalent in a lot of WordPress themes, like a lot of them, mostly premium ones. So you're probably wondering, well, why didn't you just use this one, Rob? Because this one is more popular, and we want to know more about this one and less about the one that you could barely find. Okay, the reason being is because this one is like pretty big and heavy and robust, and it's fantastic if you're developing a theme or a plugin that has like, I don't even know, like 30 or 40 or 50 settings, you know, like a bunch, like that you want to categorize into different pages. And if you wanted to have like a whole bunch of fancy like fields and all this crazy stuff, like this is the one you want to use, is Redux. And I've already used it for a plugin that I built at my work, and it works fantastically. I love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But in some situations, it's just too much. And so Dan realized this, and after he helped, he's not the person that created this single-handedly. He worked with a few other people to develop this framework. He realized after he did that this thing is overkill for most plugins. And so if you have a small plugin that only needs a small amount of settings added to it, you should be able to use something that's smaller and lighter and a little easier to set up. And so that's where the section S214 settings comes into play, this one. So that's why I chose to use this one instead of Redux, because I knew I was only going to need like less than 10 settings. And so I just went with that. It's that simple. I told you that I would tell you about 3. To be completely honest. Oh, okay. So the third one, I know there's other settings frameworks out there, first of all. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't do a lot of like work researching other ones that are out there, because Redux literally is like the one that most people use. But I'm sure if we do a quick Google search, we'll find some others that I just didn't know about. Like this one, apparently, by James C. Kemp. And I'm sure this is fine. I'm sure it's good. Probably does the trick. But the idea here is that let's not use just the basic WordPress settings API to set our stuff up, because it takes way too long. Use a framework of some kind, whether it's the S214 one or whatever you find on Google, or it's Redux. Use something. Here's something called Titan. I've never heard of this one. I can't believe there's so many now. That's interesting. I mean, obviously it's a problem that needs to be solved, so there's a lot of people trying to solve it, but I don't know why you would go reinvent the wheel with other people who have like done a pretty good job of creating one that works quite well. And wow, this one has a lot of people contributing to it. Interesting. I might do some research on this one on my own. Titan framework. Just a few lines of code. Okay. All right, cool. They're all basically going to do the same thing. They're going to create a sweet settings area. The thing that I like about Redux the most is that the fields that they use are like really slick. We're not going to get into like all of the nuances and differences of these frameworks. You can go do your own research. There's like YouTube videos that give you a walkthrough of what, types of different settings areas that these can create and the different fields that they can populate for you. Some of them have sweet color pickers built into them. Some of them has like font selectors built into them. Some are designed to automatically integrate with Google Fonts, so you can pull like Google Fonts in easily. I mean, it just does a bunch of cool stuff. The more important thing that we're here to learn about is, once we choose a settings framework, how do we set it up, right? How do we get it working? Now, each one is going to be different. I'm going to show you how I use the S214 one to work with this plugin in particular. And And then if you guys have any questions over that, then we'll go from there. So obviously, we'll go to the documentation for this guy, because every one of these is going to have a documentation page that shows you how to get it working and set up. And so this is like the main place to go to look for all the settings. I think there's a link to another page in here somewhere that shows you, yeah, this guy, that'll show you all the different fields that you can use. Yeah. So here's all the different fields that come with it. So you get like a checkbox field, a color field, descriptive text field, editor field, an HTML field, multi-check, number, password, radio. A lot of these are like very common ones, others not so much. Like I said, this thing is really slim and light, so there's not going to be a bunch of fancy pants business going on in here. It's got an upload one, which is cool, a license one, which is cool. Yeah, and then you can add your own using this hook here. So let's get to it. Let's look in my code and see how I got this all set up. Now he says in here, all you really need to do is in your main plugin page or your main plugin area, you just start adding these functions. And then you add your menu items and stuff like this, and then you tell it about your different submenus like this, and the tabs you set up like this, and the settings sections, so you can have different sections of settings in a given page. You do it like that. We're not going to read over all of this. It's be extremely boring. And then each setting, so it says adding a setting. Each setting is a field essentially, right? So we'll go in here and see how I did all that. So like any WordPress plugin, you're going to have your main plugin file, okay? And so this is like the plugin file that kicks off all your other plugin files. We're not going to get into like basic We're not going to get into like basic WordPress plugin development here, but all you really need to know to build a plugin is you literally just create a folder, the name of your plugin, you create a file, the name of your plugin, .php in that folder, and then in that PHP file, all you need to do is put this or whatever, something like that in there, and obviously change the plugin name and URI and all these things to match your plugin, and that's it. That's literally all you got to do. You go back to your plugins page after you put that on your website. You will see it listed in the list of plugins. All you have to do at that point is activate it. Once you activate it, that code gets run and it's active, and anything inside this file gets run. It's that simple. So we'll start at the top. We'll go work our way down. I've got some includes here. This is just some event stuff, a widgets thing. Here's where I instantiate the S214 settings framework. I call it global, and then I start requiring files. And I'm basically just calling in a bunch of stuff. And what you'll notice is that if we look on here, some of this is happening. Like this is happening here. Here's where we require that, and then there's that. And then here's the other part. I'm doing some other funny business in here elsewhere. I'll show you what that is here in a second. But I instantiate the settings by saying new S214 settings. And then I create this global that stores all the settings so I can access them from anywhere in my code. And then we run our config. I set up my own class that configures S214 for me. And then this is a different part of it. That's the BuddyPress modifications that my plugin makes. So we'll go ahead and look at this. The config one here. This is the one that configures the S214 settings. So basically I decided that instead of putting all of that other code that's needed to like configure S214 to get it to do all the things that I want to do in this file, I just created another file and put it all in there just to keep my code nice and clean and segmented and all that. So we'll just go in here to the config, and I believe this is what I'm doing it. Maybe it's in here. No, this is the main. So this is his file, I believe. No, just kidding. That is not true. This is my file. This is where I'm configuring it. Right? I think so. Or it's a combination of the two. It's been so long since I worked on this. Sorry, guys. I probably should have looked over this code a bit before I so brazenly decided to just present all this. Yeah, it's a combination of the two. That's what's happening here. So all of my actual, like where I create the different settings and submenus and pages and all that stuff, all of that stuff actually happens in here. I feel like you guys can't see that very well. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, knock those lights down all the way to 100, because this light right here is totally like glaring all up on this wall.
That helps a bunch.
Yeah. Not to mention, like, the resolution isn't the greatest on this projector. But anyway, so in his documentation, he says use these filters to make these functions to add the different parts of the settings area. So we've got this method here that adds our submenu, which is only one of them because we only have one page, but you have to put it in a submenu. You can't like not do that. So I create one submenu that's our only submenu, and then I go through and I give it a section called general. I don't know what else to call it. It goes in the main settings, and then down here I have another method that goes and like essentially creates all the different fields. So for every field, there's one of these. And there's also some fields that you can't see. I've got some hidden fields that are in there for reasons that I can't remember and probably don't want to talk about anyway. So yeah, here's all the different fields. The API key, the consumer key, all the stuff that you saw. Where are we at? All the stuff we're seeing here, that's how those get created. Is it just goes through that array and then programmatically just plops the fields in. And it's that simple. I don't have to do any writing of any HTML or JavaScript or CSS or anything. It just automatically gets made. Here's my general tab. It's all in a main section, and then my whole settings area is in one menu item down here. Okay, so that's that. The other configuration stuff is basically what he's telling us to do down here, where we're creating the menu page and some of this stuff. I think that's in the settings one though. I don't remember what the other file is for. Let's figure this out. What is this, the regular settings one for? This one. Add settings page, register settings. We're enqueuing some scripts. Here's process actions. Add settings tooltip. There's where we create the settings page. Here's where we render the settings page. To be completely honest with you, I don't remember what this does. Get settings tab. Retrieve tab. You know, it's highly possible that I tried to do this without the framework at first and then decided to go use the framework, and this may not even be used anymore. There's a big old file to have in there to not be using anything from it though. Get registered settings? What the heck is all this? Settings sanitization? This must just be some file that came with his framework. We could probably figure this out real quick by just going over here. Sorry, I know that's like very bright. Yeah, if we go back to the main GitHub page, I'm sure we'll see. Yeah, it is. Okay. I was confused because I was looking in there. I thought I saw some stuff like specific to my usage of it, and that should all be happening outside of the plugin. But yeah, I thought like up here I saw something where it was like specifically referencing. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just losing my mind. Yeah, see this, the page title. I think that's the only part though that I saw. I don't know what I was doing there. Anyway, I think this is just necessary for the framework to work at all. Cool. So yeah, the only part that I really needed to build was this one, and that was just because I didn't want to put all this code in the main plugin file in here, just so I could keep this thing lighter, because the plugin is going to need to do a lot more than just manipulate the settings framework. So I don't want to just pollute the whole main plugin file with a bunch of stuff specific to just setting up the settings page, if that makes any sense. I mean, I know I didn't get really specific, mostly because we don't have time to get specific, but eventually this plugin will be available to everybody, and so you can just dig through my code at that point if you're really interested. But yeah, are there any questions so far as to what I've gone over? Like, anything that's not basic. I mean, I'm sure somebody like you who doesn't know a whole lot about PHP quite yet is probably like, I don't know what any of this means. But I mean, how many experienced programmers are in here? Yeah, so I'm sure you guys all know what functions are and classes and methods. Require once, we're just telling it, hey, go find this file and bring it in. You know, just simple stuff like that. It's just ways for me to consolidate all these other files that are in my plugin into one place. It brings them all in with these requires, and then we do stuff like instantiate. Well, we create variables that we instantiate classes in, thus creating objects, and then we go off and do a bunch of other stuff. I'm sure I'm sloppy, and I probably put a bunch of stuff in here I didn't need to put in here. We'll get into that here soon.
Yeah, I do have a question.
Yes.
So for a framework like Redux, I know it's heavyweight, but what is the detriment to using something like that? Like, what does it slow down the website? Is it?
It's a lot more files.
Okay.
So when you grab the whole folder, I mean, like here you're seeing, in order to get the settings framework to work at all, I have to include this settings folder, and inside of this settings folder is only one file that I created, and the rest of the files were files that came with the framework, and it's stuff that has to be there in order for those settings pages to work. Because Redux is so much more robust, there's a lot more files that have to be in there. JavaScript files, CSS files, you name it. There's a whole bunch. So it will increase the file size of your plugin because of that. And ideally, you want to keep the file size of your plugin as small as possible. So it doesn't make sense to have a very small, light plugin that doesn't do a whole lot, have this giant area of it that's just for settings that maybe you only have 6 settings, but that thing is prepared to provide you with hundreds of settings if you need to. So that's the biggest detriment. Obviously, file size will affect performance in some situations, but not usually. It's mostly just so that when we package this thing up and deliver it, we don't have a giant amount of bloat built into that package. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. Solid question, though. Yeah, so...
If you're using either framework and there's something else using the same framework, does that mean it's stored out there twice?
No. Good question. So you're saying, like, if we've got 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 plugins and they're all using the framework, right? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah.
So you'll end up with the files that make up that framework in your WordPress site multiple times. copies of them for sure, no doubt. But what happens when you instantiate the framework? What's happening when we do this right here is that we're instantiating this for us. Like, that's why we have to provide it a slug in the first place, to prevent that problem entirely, so that we make sure that our settings framework usage does not interfere possibly with any other plugins that might be using the same settings framework.
My question is, what happens if two different versions of the framework are out there and they're using different versions of the code?
The root code?
Yeah.
They're just going to do different stuff. There's no, it's not going to break anything. It's just that different versions of things have different features and different stuff going on in them. So, if another plugin is using an older version of the framework, then that plugin is going to be limited to what that version can provide it. And it's going to have whatever bugs that come with that version and so on and so forth. But it's not going to matter in the grand scheme of things for your WordPress site, because it's just isolated to your plugin. That's a good question, though.
So essentially, you could go and find this framework and basically copy and paste and then kind of edit. And you could create a plugin that way.
Yep, for the most part. I mean, so you still got to go through these. Here comes bright screen again. You still have to, go through this process, that it outlines here, right? So, you still got to write maybe 5. You have to create like 5 functions or so, 6 functions maybe, to get it all doing exactly what you want it to do. But you could do that all in one file, like I did. So, it's not exactly copy and paste, but yes, it is mostly copy and paste. You're going to upload the root directory of the framework up into your plugin, and then you're going to create a new PHP file that kind of does all the things that it's outlining here. And then that's it. And you've got settings. It manages all of the saving of the data that the user inputs into the database, calling that data, and also provides you with very easy ways to then call that data in other places as well, which we'll need to do when we're going and writing our code that communicates with Meetup, which is the next part of this talk, which is how do we use WordPress to connect to third-party APIs. So that's the whole reason why we need to have this settings page in the first place, is because in order to make proper authenticated calls to Meetup, we need to access the data that's input into here to make the calls, right? So instead of hard coding it into our plugin, we create settings areas in here that we can then access using the framework. And the framework gives us a very easy way to do that. I made it even easier on top of that by creating a global that I store all of that inside of, which is what's happening here. I created a global called that, and I'm taking settings and I'm calling a method in that class called getSettings, and I'm just putting it in a global so I never have to call this thing again. I only have to call it once. Then all I do is call this global anywhere in my code where I need to access any of the data that's been saved in those settings. It will get them for me, and then I just access them using object-oriented programming arrow functions. So I say, well, if I want the group URL, all I have to do is call muffwpg settings arrow, and then I just have to know what that field is called. I'm guessing it's called group underscore URL or something like that. Does that make sense? And you'll see that soon in a second when I show you how we're making those calls. You'll see how I'm grabbing the data that the admin user has input and then using it to actually make calls and stuff. Cool. Any questions? Any other questions about the settings framework stuff? Again, I don't want to spend too much time on it because, like, even when we get into the API call stuff, things are going to get crazy, especially if you don't understand how HTTP requests work or author or OAuth or whatever. Like, that's going to get kind of crazy here in a second. So I do want to make sure that I answer any questions that's related to this now before we move on. I mean, you're obviously welcome to ask them later, but I don't want other people to forget. Any other questions about the framework? Like I said, every framework is going to be different. But I will tell you this, every framework will give you an easy way to programmatically generate the fields with their labels. And what type of input field, you just give it a text thing that says what type. And then they'll all give you a way to easily access all the data that's been like saved using those. They'll all have like a get settings thing. Redux does. I'm sure all the other ones that we looked at by Googling, they'll all have the same thing. Cool? Right. So if we look through here, since this is our main file, I'm not going to get into some of this other stuff. Like, you know, we're using BuddyPress. There's a whole class in here designed to manipulate BuddyPress. There's quite a bit of stuff going on in here. We're not going to get into all that. I did create a main class for the whole plugin that I instantiate. I think at the bottom, yeah, here. And then what this does for me is it holds like a lot of basic public methods that I may need to use in a bunch of different ways. And so this is the easiest way that I've found to integrate with any API. Now, if I was using this plugin to talk to a bunch of different APIs, I probably would take everything related to each API and move it into its own file. But since I know that Meetup is my primary point of interest for this plugin, I'm just dumping it all straight into this one class. So we have a constructor. Basically, it gives me a way to get the settings from the options framework. And then it also holds the group URL. So if I need an easy way to get the group URL, I can just say muffwpg group URL, and boom, I can get the group URL. Now, I could do that using the global too, but it's just nice to have a bunch of different ways to get to stuff, and I don't know, sometimes I over-engineer things probably. So, here you can see that I've got a generic method that I use to make requests to Meetup's API. And the idea here being that no matter what endpoint I want to hit, or what method I want to execute, or what version of the API I want to hit, and what parameters need to be passed, I can use this one method to do all of that. And since I know that we're going to be calling the API a bunch of different times in a bunch of different ways and hitting a bunch of different endpoints, I like to just create one method in my main class that's responsible for handling all of that. Straight up. You'll see me accessing some of those settings probably in here. Notice how you see the this and then muffwpg options and then the API key. We need to pass the API key. Anytime we hit a version 2 endpoint, we need to pass our key and our group URL name in as query string parameters. So you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm just constructing the URL that our request needs to hit. So every API endpoint has a URL. I can illustrate that real quick. That's probably a good idea, Rob, since people are here to learn. So we can just go up to Meetup API, and we'll go to their main documentation page. And then here's where they talk about how to compose a request, and they tell you all the things you need to do it properly, and the callbacks. And then if we look over here on the right, these are all of the endpoints that we can hit and the different methods, and it tells you whether it's version 2 or version 3 or whatever. So anything that I want to use their API for, no matter what kind of data it is, I should be able to look on this page and find whatever it is I'm looking for. I mean, some of the obvious stuff is like events. You want to get the events. Okay, here you go. This is how you do it. And it tells you the URL you need to hit. You hit the main URL /events. And then it tells you your request parameters that you can send it. And then it tells you about the response that you're going to get back. And you should probably spend more time than what I'm doing right now going through this and understanding it properly so that you know what you're doing. Yeah, there's this much information on the page for a reason. Obviously, we're not going to spend a lot of time going through it all. But this is how you do it. So you'll see later where I'm actually trying to get events where I call this method in my main class to do that. I'll say muffwpg arrow request mu. I'll pass in the endpoint, not the whole endpoint. So not the whole URL, just everything after the base URL. Because I've got the base URL already built into this thing. Here you can see this mu base URL. Where am I setting mu base URL? Good question. I'm glad you asked. It's right here. Okay, so that way I don't have to write out the base URL every time. Okay, so I just say, okay, so this base URL, right? And then I've got v in here, right? So the v is like version 2, version 3, whatever. It just slap that in there for me. And then the endpoint, which is something that I dynamically pass in, right? And then so I'm just programmatically building up the URL that I'm going to hit for whatever call I'm trying to make, essentially. Yeah. Here's the group URL. I called it. Knew what it was going to be named. And the reason I need to do an if statement here is because when you hit version 3, it's slightly different. How we construct the URL. When you hit version 3, you don't need to pass in the version number, it looks like. But you do need to pass in the group URL. But you still need the key. Oh, see, like the group URL is included as a query string parameter here, but in version 3 calls, it's included in the actual like URL with, you know, like slash the name of your group, whatever, right? So that's why I had to make that distinction. Then what I do is I create an args variable, and here's where I just pass in my method. So if it's a get request or a put request or a post request or whatever, I can use this one method for any type of request whatsoever. Then if we look down here, this is all basic WordPress hit other URL type stuff. So if you've never seen this method, pretty important. Pretty important stuff. Now there is other functions that are more specific than WP remote request, but I don't use those because I like to build one main method that requests in any fashion that I want. So this remote request is a generic one, but they also have a WP remote get. They have a WP remote post. They have a bunch of these built into WordPress core that you can use if you only have like a one-off situation. But like I said, if you're going to be hitting one API in a bunch of different ways for a bunch of different things, I would recommend doing it this way, where you just create one method that's designed to make requests to whatever API, and then design this thing specifically to work with that API, and then just use the WP remote request and dictate the method here in the args. And this args can accept way more stuff than just the method, but that's all I needed to do. Okay, so then I pass it the URL, which we construct up here, and I pass it the args, which gives it the method, and then That's basically it. Then this request variable ends up being the result of hitting that endpoint. And if all went well, it's a successful call. And so we analyze the response code like this. And basically, I just want to know whether it was successful or not. So I say if response code is equal to 200, then we did good. That means return the response, and also while you're at it, go ahead and parse the response too, because there's going to be other stuff in the response like the headers and whatnot. We are only interested in the body of the response, so that's why we use this WP remote retrieve body. And since we're writing everything in PHP and what we get back is JSON, we use this JSON decode to turn the JSON into PHP, so that then we can use object-oriented PHP syntax to access all of the parameters of the JSON response. Does that make sense? And then if we, basically what this is if it's an error and it wasn't a successful call, what I want is an array that has a whole bunch of stuff in there that I'm going to need to look at to figure out why the heck it broke. There's probably some better ways you can handle this, and we could probably get way more robust with like the, how we actually like dig through the stuff, and we could probably create like an actual WP error or something like that. But I just didn't care that much to create like an official WordPress error out of the call. Probably, like, should I do that before I put this thing live and give it out to the world? Probably not a bad idea. I probably should like take this and like say, hey, I want to create a new WP error, and then WP error is its own class, and I should probably look into all the things I need to pass into that class, and then have it respond with actual WordPress errors instead of just this random array of data, essentially. But I haven't done that yet. Not because I am lazy, and so that's part of it, but also I'm more interested in just getting this thing working than properly parsing error messages. Okay, cool. Let's see. Oh, here's the service that I use to control the data that I get back. Where and how am I using this? I don't really remember. No, I have this getter service. I wonder if I never actually plugged it in or if it's being used elsewhere. Oh, I am using it, but I'm just not using it like everywhere all the time. That's what it is. I'm selectively using it in certain places. Now, if I wanted to use it for every single call all the time forever, what I should do is I should take this mu getter service and just put it in here, right? And then have it return the value and then return the result of this service is what I should do. But either I decided I didn't want to do that quite yet or something. I can't remember. But yeah. I think my thinking was that only certain types of requests are going to be triggered like frequently, like when stuff is being populated on a page and I want that stuff real time and I'm worried about people refreshing a page. So like front end stuff, front end data, I'm pumping through this mu getter service, but like the stuff in the admin area, I highly doubt somebody's going to go create like thousands of Meetup instances all at once from the admin side. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not really going to happen. So I don't have to worry about those things like clogging up the pipes and creating a bunch of API calls, if that makes any sense. But I do have a widget that feeds off of this that shows that's how we always see. And this is probably a bad example right now because if I remember correctly, when I looked at the front page of WP Omaha earlier, it was not showing any meetups. And I think that's because technically today's meetup is no longer upcoming. Oh, no, I'm wrong. There it is. So that's how this is being populated and this is being populated. Both of those, I think this is just a short code, but this is an actual widget That's how that's happening, is that it's using that MU getter service to grab the data and put it on here, and then essentially I'm using transients to cache the responses from Meetup. Anybody here ever used a transient before? Nobody? Cool. I'll go through this real quick then, because transients are pretty awesome. A lot of people use it for like basic page caching. So a lot of times you'll find people pumping just like strings of HTML into a transient. That way when you load a given page, it'll just give you what it has cached for that HTML. And transients are a lot of what happens in caching plugins. So like if anybody knows W3 Total Cache or whatever, I'm sure they use a bunch of transients, and yeah. So that's what transients are for. It's a pretty nice little nifty WordPress thing. So essentially what we've got here, I'll walk you through this method specifically. So basically we get the transient ID. So I have to find an intelligent way to figure out what the ID is for the given transient based on the endpoint. Okay, so I basically say, okay, my transient ID is going to be this string that I made up for my plugin. And then I'm going to go ahead and replace all slashes with dashes that are in the endpoint. And then we're just going to use the endpoint to title the transient, right? Because every endpoint is going to give me the same data if I call it, no matter what. Even if it's got query string parameters in it, which is something I probably should have thought about. If there's query string parameters in the endpoint, I probably don't want question marks and ampersands in my ID. That hasn't been a problem yet, but I probably should use the escape attribute function to prevent that from happening. I didn't think about that before. Anyway, so this is how a basic transient usage works. How many people knew that you could do this? You could say if, and then you could do a backwards conditional, and then declare a variable, and then pump the result of something into the variable. Did anybody know you could do that with PHP? I sure as heck didn't until I looked at the documentation for how to use the transients. This isn't something that I invented. If you go look up WordPress transients and you look at their example code, their little example shows you exactly that. There's a transients API, and that's how I learned about that. I was like, holy cow, I didn't know you could do that. What's going on here? Where's my, here's the set transient. Is my page stuck? Okay, yeah. Blah, 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 blah. See, right here. Example usage. I didn't know you could do that. So you declare a variable, and then this figures out what the variable is, and it's just like a really clean way of doing it. I didn't know that you could do it that way until I looked at this. I was like, oh, sweet. That's awesome, because otherwise I would have wrote that like way longer than that. So it's a really clean way to do conditionals. Anyway, back in here. So basically it says create a variable that is the result of getting the transient of the transient ID we just constructed. And if the result of that is false, then what I want you to do, which means that it doesn't exist, then I want you to go ahead and execute all this code. What is this code? Well, let's start by making the request, right? And then I want the result of this request mu, which remember, it's already going to be PHP stuff because we're already retrieving the response and we're already JSON decoding it and only getting the body and all that good jazz. So this ends up being only data. So that's why we only have to call this, and then there's our value. So that's the response from the API exactly the way that we like to get it. And then what we do is we set a time. And then what I'm doing is using that whatever the admin set in there for their cache time, right? So it's, if you guys don't remember what that was, it is this guy right here, right? And then all I'm doing is multiplying that by 60 to turn it into minutes. Because by default, it's seconds. If that makes any sense.
That's sporting of you.
I figured you guys would all appreciate that as admins, so that you don't have to put long string. Right, yeah. Most of the time, the admins just want to know, how many minutes do I want this thing to cache for? Cool. So then we set the transient, right? And so how the transient API works is you give it an ID, you give it a value, and then you tell it how long that should be like valid, or how long until it goes stale, essentially, right? Once it's stale and it hits the expiration time, it removes itself and no longer exists, at which point then this becomes true, right? So now all we got to do is return value, right? So if this is true, right? If true is equal to this, well, okay, it's not actually going to return true. What it's going to do is not going to return false. It's going to return whatever the value is that we stored, right? So it's just going to be the opposite of false. It's going to be some data, right? And as long as it's anything other than something falsy, that's going to make it true, and at which point our variable has already been created here, and we just return that so that we don't have to write an else to the statement. Does that make sense to everybody? It's a little tricky, right? Like, I had never seen this type of thing done before, you know, because otherwise you'd be like, well, okay, that solves the problem of, like, if it's not created yet, but what if it's already created? Then don't we have to get the data or whatever? So then you would have to do an else, and you have to say, well, otherwise, like, give me the data and blah, blah, blah. But this, like, does it all in one shot, which is nice. So cool, you learned something about PHP today, and you learned something about transients, and that's basically how it works. I've got some other cool, like, useful little methods that I might thought maybe I'll use this in multiple places, and so I stick them in there, like whether or not the meetup is today. I created a function to figure that out. So if you guys all go try to, like, check in for this meetup tomorrow or yesterday or whatever, good luck. It's not going to happen because I got this method in here that handles that for me, and it basically just says, if it is today, then show this whole thing that allows them to do the check-in. If it's not, then it says, sorry, there's no meetups today, so you can't check in for anything. Cool, cool?
Probably we're supposed to be able to check in after the fact.
I can manually check people in after the fact, but you yourself cannot check yourself in after the fact. Yeah, and unfortunately, I can't show you that little user interface because of that little 302 business that we discovered earlier. Cool, cool. So that's the main plugin file. We went through it all in detail. This is usually how I do API stuff, is with one big method that just does all of it. And then now I guess I'll just show you some areas where I'm actually using this. So if we want to see all the places where I'm using request MU, I can just do a Control-Shift-F. And as you can see, I'm only doing it in 4 places, but that's because this plugin is fairly infantile. So let's see here. The form that you guys all interacted with to check in, I believe that is this. No, it's not. Never mind. This is the form I used to create the meetup. That's what this is. Yes, that is what this is, right? So in order to do that, if you guys remember when I set up the meetup, it gave me a drop down. It said choose from whatever meetups that we know about for your group on meetup.com, and it knew about all like previous ones or current upcoming ones or whatever, right? And so what I do is I start off at the top and I say, let's instantiate my class that gives me all my fun stuff. And let's call request MU to get a list of all the events. Then I go and look up past events because by default, I think this only gives you upcoming events. And so, oh, and I also wanted to split them up in 2 different lists. I wanted, like, at the top of that drop down to be the upcoming ones because that's usually the ones that they're going to click on. And then below that, I wanted past ones to show up, you know, in the case that, like, maybe somebody forgot to do this or something, you don't want all those people to be SOL because somebody forgot to do it. So you should be able to go in after the fact, create a meetup on here based off of a previous meetup that already happened, and then go in like we just discussed and manually check people in so that they can get awarded the points they deserve for showing up at the meetup. So that's what I'm doing here is I'm getting the past events and the next events separately. I think here, this no earlier, what I'm doing is I'm telling it I only want past meetups that are up to 3 months old. So if it's a meetup that's older than 3 months ago, it's not going to show up in that drop-down list. Could I make this a setting in the area using my settings framework? Yes. Could I do it pretty quickly? Absolutely, I could. It would only be literally like one more field. I just add another field. I tell it what kind of field I want it to be, and then I could like have them, and hey, how old do you want to be able to go back on your meetups or whatever? If it might be 6 months, maybe a year, whatever, I don't know. So I just hard coded it at 3 months. Here's my past events. Here's where I get the past events. So now I've got 2 variables, one with the next events, one with the past events. And then it looks like I'm going to create one big one called all events. And then what I'm doing is going through and adding these in here exactly the way that I want them so that they all show up in the order that I want them. Don't mind this. This is just how I do my testing while I write stuff, and eventually I'll go through and clear all that crap out before I publish this plugin. And then down here is where I go ahead and write the HTML that makes up the page that we looked at to create the meetup. And so we're just going through here and putting all that together and blah, 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 blah. Then this is some JavaScript fancy business, and all this is just stuff related to the page itself. Has nothing to do with the API integration or the settings framework. Yeah, mostly. And notice how I'm adding some post meta. We're inserting a post. So this is what happens once the page reloads, when we post the data. This is how it goes and creates the post automatically. We do an insert post, and we put some meetup data in there, and the check-in code goes in there, and all that good jazz. Cool, cool. That's how you do API integration. Any questions? You guys should all be able to go write a plugin that integrates with any API now. No problem. I hope you all have a lot of questions, because otherwise you're just going to watch me live improve this plugin over the last half hour of this meetup. Unless you guys are all excited to get to Old Chicago.
Well, where's the part, I think you went over it, the part that is giving us that redirect error?
Oh, the redirect? Why we're getting a redirect error? I currently don't know what's causing that redirect error yet. All I did was point out that I can't show you the page where that shows up because of the redirect error.
Could you show us the code for the page?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I could do you one better. I'll show you the code how I created the custom post type, which is where the code is to create the page anyway. So, where is that? Maybe under includes? Yes. So CPT meetup. That stands for custom post type meetup. So this is how I created the custom post type that tracks all the different meetups. So basically for every meetup that's on meetup.com, we want to create a post in WordPress that holds all the data that we want to track about the meetup separately from the data that meetup.com has. So we want to know who all showed up, which meetup doesn't allow you to track. Well, you can tell it, like you can go into meetup and tell it like so-and-so didn't show up or so-and-so didn't show up or whatever, but we would have to manually go do that as an organizer, where we want this thing to kind of do it all, and we want to track it separately. We want the people showing up to check in and tell us that they showed up, not us go in and tell Meetup that they didn't show up. So Here's where we create the Chewy every Thursday, I swear. Chewbacca reminds me it's trash night, and it's always during a meetup. And I think I've thought about disabling that because I know I'm always at meetups. But then on Thursdays where there are no meetups, I wouldn't remember that it's trash night. And then B, I feel like he's almost become like a mascot of the group in that sense, where he kind of always shows up at 8 o'clock and is like, "Hey, Chewbacca," and so I feel like it's a cool, neat little quirk about when I do talks up here. So you guys all get to deal with Chewbacca at 8 o'clock every time during one of my talks.
I always thought it was a kid out there. How much I like children.
So we're just creating a custom post type. This is nothing too crazy. We're not going to get into how to register post types, but this is what's happening here. We're doing a bunch of message manipulation here. Meetup toolbar, blah, blah, blah. And in here, we get to add all of our custom meta boxes. And somewhere along the line, we're getting a redirect code. Here's where we save the event's data. So whenever we do a post to the edit page, this essentially, we trigger a filter, and this is how we save all of our custom data specific to our custom post type, essentially. So that's where that happens. And then this is a little function that I use to check in the users manually from the back end in the save area. And then this is where we create the custom, there's basically a custom meta box on that page that allows me to change the check-in code later if I need to, or like reference it like, hey, that's the check-in code because I forgot what it was. Here's where we're doing the manual check-in. So it's an input field. I'm doing some cool stuff there, actually. I really hope I get a chance to show it off. Here's where we show a list of checked-in members, and then it just like lists a bunch of people by name, or it tells you if that array is empty that nobody's checked in yet. So by default, when you create a custom post type, it does all the edit page stuff for you, right? Because every post is the same. It just gives you a basic post edit page. So we don't have to go manually create a page for that. What we do is we just go in and we add custom parts to that page, if that makes any sense. But by default, when you create a custom post type, you get a place to edit it. It's just part of how it works. And by default, you get a menu item too. You don't actually have to go tell WordPress, hey, I want a menu item for my new custom post type. It just does that for you. Or I think there might be a option in here to tell it, like you could definitely dictate the position in the menu where the custom post type shows up, which is what we're doing here. So if I want it to show up lower or higher or whatever, I can change this number and control it from there. I think if we don't want it to show up, we set public to false, and then it'll allow us to create custom post types that don't have a menu item. But by default, public to true creates a menu item. Yeah. And then we use this supports array to tell it what features of a post that are possible in WordPress that we want. And I want a title, and I want the editor, and I want the thumbnail, and I want the excerpt, and I want custom fields. There's a lot of other stuff you can push into this array. You have to look at custom post type documentation on WordPress to figure all those out. We get to dictate a dash icon. So that's how I get the group icon in there. Whether or not we can, oh no, I'm sorry. This is the URL we go to get a listing of all of them. So if we go to our website /meetup_meetings, we should see a page that lists them all. Hopefully. Unless I'm not smart. Yeah, there you go. So these are all the meetups since I've created this plugin that we've actually created meetups in here for. And then this will probably just take me to the page that it keeps redirecting me to. Yeah. Now, you probably want me to go figure out what's causing that 302 redirect, don't you?
Kinda, yeah.
Andres. Why do you always have to be that guy, man? What is this?
I just, just don't want to stay up at night thinking about it. Like, I wonder what it was. And who's going to tell us?
I don't know what it is, man. I don't know, because this was working perfectly like 2 weeks ago. I don't know what code I would have changed that would have caused that. So I'm just gonna.
Fun to make you debug on the fly in front of a room full of people.
It's just. I mean, I tell you right now.
Interviewing at Google.
It's not going to be easy to figure this out. Oh, hold on a second. Because I don't kill too many brain cells drinking or doing other things, I think I might remember what it is. So what I worked on recently while I was figuring out why the heck it wasn't like logging people in properly was I realized that I had it by default. At first, it was redirecting people back to the register page. And I didn't, like, if you go, like, what I really didn't want was I didn't want the workflow. I already know what it is, but I just want to explain to you how I figured it out. Okay, so what was going on at first was after, we need to add a dark theme to our website so that we don't end up with this problem, right? Yeah. I'm sorry for blinding you all, kind of. You're getting a bunch of free knowledge, so I'm kind of not that sorry. Deal with it. Bring sunglasses next time or something. Okay, so what was happening is that when we go to register, well, I can't do it on this one because I'm already logged in. It's going to boot me away once I'm logged in, which is probably part of the problem too. And since I'm already logged in here, so I'm going to have to log out of this one first. So we'll wait for it to take its time, logging me out. Okay, so this is the register page. And so this is the page that I have it kicking me back to. This is the redirect URL that I've provided to Meetup, so that after I've successfully made the initial Meetup request, I'm telling it, hey, redirect me back to this page with your secret hash code or whatever you created, and then allow me to use that secret hash code to then finish the process of authenticating and getting the user. All of that information is in the Meetup API. If we go to, this is all about composing a request, but what we really want to know is authentication. And then if we go to OAuth, well, no, I think if we just scroll down on this page, if I remember correctly, yeah. So this is where we create the redirect URI, server flow. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's going to return us back to the redirect URI with a code. Single-use authorization code. So what it's going to do is it's going to send us back to the redirect URI, which in this case is the register page with a query string parameter tacked on called code, and then my code is there, and then I can grab that using PHP and finish the process of the user credentials, which here you can see it asks me to take that code and make another request that's a post with using that code. And then I get an access token and a refresh token, and then I can use this access token to continue to hit the API as many times as I want with that access token. And then I can also save this refresh token so that I can go through the OAuth process with the refresh token later and say, hey, remember me? Here's my refresh token. And then it'll be like, hey, I know that token. Here's a new access token and a new refresh token, because you're only allowed to use the refresh token once. This is basic OAuth 2 process. So if none of you have had to do any OAuth 2 authentication using programming or PHP or anything, I've had to do a bunch of it, not just with PHP. I've had to do it in .NET. I've had to do it in JavaScript, a bunch of different ways, because I am really obsessed with integration apparently. Yeah. This is common stuff. You get a refresh token. So we store the refresh token, and then I have like a little method. Normally I would have a little method that anytime I use a refresh token to get an access token, I go and obviously store the access token somewhere temporary, and then I go change the refresh token at the same exact time in its permanent location. Sometimes it's a custom place in the WordPress database. Most times it's just a place either in WP options or like in the case of this, if I wanted to store every single user's their own refresh token, I could just store it in their meta, the user meta, right? So I could just say, hey, store user meta refresh token, or I would probably call it MU_refresh or something like that. Then I could just call that user's refresh token at any time to get an access token, and then just start accessing Meetup as them essentially, if I ever want to. Which means that, again, if you all think I'm a bad person, you probably shouldn't go ahead and just go putting your stuff in here and, you know, authenticating with Meetup, because then I can go and control your whole Meetup profile if I wanted to. But I'm not a bad person. I'm a good person, and so that's not what I'm doing. It's mostly just so that, like, if I think the plugin, if I ever want to add features to the plugin that would like query data from your Meetup profile to put on your profile page on here or whatever, I could do that. Or maybe later if I want to add a feature where from our website you can adjust your RSVP on Meetup, then I can make it do that if I wanted to. Does that make any sense? Yeah. So that's what's happening there. So I had it just landing on the register page. Then I said, okay, well, I don't want him to just be on the register page. I'll just kick him home. So I would send him to the home page. Well, that was causing some other problems too. And then I realized, well, okay, that's all good and fine. I can get him to the home page, no problem. Wait, let's go to the other tab where I'm not logged in. Okay, so I can kick him to the home page afterwards. And unfortunately, what's going to happen though is that if they went to go check in and weren't logged in yet, and then use this to log in, now they have to go back into here and go to free meetups and click on check-in again once they're logged in. And I didn't want to do that. So what I did was I said, okay, well, I'm just going to create a query string parameter that pushes them to the check-in page again if I think they actually came from the check-in page originally. And that's my most recent change. And as you can see, since I'm doing redirect business to change what page people end up on, and I just did that recently, 2 + 2 = 4, and now I know where the problem lies. It's that simple. So now I get to go find the part of the code where I actually did that, because to be completely honest with you, I don't really remember where I did that.
Would be waking up at 2 a.m. like, oh wait, that's what I did.
Been there, sure. I don't see
And you can sleep tonight.
in module, in directory. Yeah, let's do an in directory, and let's just look. Crap, I don't remember what directory this is in. WP Omaha. Website, root, there we go, now we're getting somewhere. Plugins, Meetup for WP groups. All right, cool. Here's all the places where I'm doing redirect stuff. WP safe redirect, that's tempting. Upload, I'm looking for one that tells it to go to a specific page that I dictate with that query string parameter. Are these all records? Edit Meetup records. There's a lot of redirect stuff in here. Query, form. I feel like it's in this BuddyPress mods on the register page. Let's see what's happening here. Yes. So here's where I'm doing the safe redirect to the register page. This is where I'm manually logging users in once I've gotten the code, authorized the user, maybe or may not created the user, if current user, change to the user, SSL, blah, blah, blah. Something still doesn't look right here. Oh, I know what it is. I've been doing too much work on my home computer. So this is when you make a good point to say, hey, if you work on multiple machines, sometimes it's a good idea to do this and say download from here. And now it's going to go and refresh all of my files with what's on the server, which means that all of my stuff locally will be up to date, which is always a smart thing to do. There we go. Aha, this looks much better. All right, cool. Notice how we have a safe redirect here and a safe redirect here now. So basically what I'm saying is if current user, so I'm getting a user by, and I'm saying if I find a user, then do this stuff. And then if I don't, then send them back to the register page. And then my guess is when I safe redirect to the home, something's not right here. Obviously, because it's all broken, right? So we're still trying to figure that part out. Let's see, so I'm redirecting people back to the home URL. I'm so sketched out about it. Is this really like the most recent version? Hold on, where's my, I feel like I'm gonna go look at it live on the server and make sure that this is, yeah, I mean, okay. I kind of figured it was because I just did that thing, but quick sanity check is never a bad idea. Okay, cool. So we're sending them back to the home URL. There's got to be something on the home URL. Something's happening on init, I think. And I don't think that's happening in here. How about we go ahead and do that same find again? And see if we find another redirect now somewhere else. Well, there's a lot more in here. Ooh, look at this guy. Redirect to post by ID. Yeah. Okay, this is probably connected to a hook. It's all coming back to me, guys. There it is. Yes. Okay, so on init of WordPress, we're running this method and we're saying redirect a post by ID. Aha, I get it now. I know what's happening. We go back down to this guy. It says, hey, if is set get post, then we are redirecting to the permalink of the post. That's the problem. So now what we got to do is say, okay, that's all good and fine, except for if I'm in the freaking admin area, obviously, right? So that we can actually, so apparently post is already coming across in the get request when we're in the admin area trying to look at a post. I didn't know that. I know it now though, the hard way. So now what we got to do is find something that's unique about the admin area to make sure that this only gets triggered when we're not in the admin. I believe edit is probably what we're going to look for, and I'm sure there's other ways to do it too that I could discover that might be more intelligent, but the first thing that comes to my mind is when we go to a post and we go to edit that post. Oh god, don't tell me it's going to do it here too. Oh, it is going to do it there. It's doing it everywhere. All right, let's start by checking the post type, everybody. How about we do that? Make sure it only happens to the one post type. Cool, so if is set get post and are we always going to have the global post object? I guess we could still go, is there a get post type? Yes. And get post type. Oh God, I did not mean to hit that button, sorry. Once we get the post type of this guy is equal to, I don't remember the name of my post type, so I'm going to go back here and find it. It is